Hi, I'm Victor Perton, and I'm the Chief Optimism Officer at the Centre for Optimism. And I'd like to welcome our newest member, Gary Moyer. And Gary is the author of a fantastic new book called Opting for Optimism, a balanced approach to staying positive in a negative world. Gary, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Victor.
Look, it is an utter privilege. And the first question we always ask someone in one of these interviews at the Centre for Optimism is, what makes you optimistic? So Gary, what makes you optimistic?
What makes me optimistic, Victor, is I know that every day that I get up, I have an opportunity to make a positive difference in somebody's life I come in contact with, whether it's when I'm doing a speech or through my book or through talking to someone in person or a handwritten card or a smile. And I realize that with that opportunity literally comes an opportunity to change the world person by person, through the butterfly effect. So that motivates me. That makes me optimistic. I can make a change. I can make a positive difference.
That's utterly brilliant, because one of the philosophies of the Centre for Optimism is that optimism is a state of mind, not the state of the world. And even the other day, we saw Zelensky on Fareed Zakaria's program, and he was so upbeat. Zakaria was, oh my gosh, you're living in such grief. How can you remain optimistic? And Zelensky said, I have faith in people. I have faith in people. So Gary, what makes you optimistic for the world?
Well, it's people like you and me and the folks on this Zoom. More and more people, I think, are realizing the importance of becoming optimistic, whether you are naturally or not, which is what my book deals with. And the reality is this: the media would make it seem like the world is worse than it is. But what I do is I say to people, okay, you've seen what the news has been showing. Let me ask you a question. How many people you personally know are doing those nasty things you see on there? And hardly anybody knows anybody. Perspective has so much to do with it. A positive, realistic perspective.
Oh, utterly brilliant. One of the things we do, is particularly define optimism. And our favorite definition is actually 700 years old, from Mother Julian of Norwich, who said, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And we think if she'd lived 700 years, she could have written the Harvard definition of optimism, which is a belief that good things will happen and that things will work out in the end. And of course, Noreen, who's on the call, channels John Lennon, who said, and if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. So what's your definition of, Gary, that underpins your book and your philosophy?
Is really a definition of optimism. It's almost basically synonymous with hope. It's just a hope that things will get better. There's a better life coming. Life is good. I mean, when you think about your experiences in life, things generally work out. And I believe hope and optimism are almost synonymous. It's living a life with hope. Hope is what keeps people going, right? I mean, it's what encourages people to keep going when things get challenging. If I've got hope, I'm going to make it. I mean, think about it. If I've got a 2-week vacation in Hawaii coming up, now those of you who live in Australia, Hawaii may not be that great for you. I want to go to Australia one day, but let's say I've got a 2-week vacation coming to Hawaii. I can make it through this week with no problem, right? Because I know that's coming. We all know what it's like. I'll get more work done this week. I won't let anything stop me because I have hope that something better is coming.
That is utterly brilliant, because one of the things that's confused me, the Anglican Church and the current Pope and the Catholic Church are wound up saying there is a difference between hope and optimism. And in particular, the current Pope sort of advocates hope rather than optimism, whereas the previous Pope, Benedict, if anyone goes to our resource on Mother Julian of Norwich, Pope Benedict lauded Mother Julian and lauded optimism as a trait. So Do you want to just elaborate a little bit more in that faith-based debate on the value of hope and optimism?
Yeah, and that's interesting because you mentioned faith. As I come from the Christian religion, Christian background, and the connection is this: as a Christian, I believe God loves me unconditionally, and that I have a hope of heaven or paradise, however different people look at it. And so my faith is a strong, never give up belief in that hope. That's what my faith is. In fact, in the Bible, Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so as I read that, that tells me faith gives substance to hope. And so that's really what keeps me going. I have a faith that no matter what happens now, I have an eternity. I mean, I only have 80, 90 years here. I can make it through this. I've got eternity coming. Plus, I also have a belief that God is my strength. He'll get me through this. This is going to work. So I have hope, and that keeps me going. And that gives me true perspective. You know, I can't be down when I realize God's got this.
I just love that. And one of the phrases you used in there was about dreams. And one of our members is the molecular psychiatrist, Professor G at Deakin University, who defines optimism as the evidence of dreams not yet realized.
Perfect.
So you channel that beautifully. Now, the core of your book is balanced, intentional optimism. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what is balanced, intentional optimism?
Yes. And of course, I use an acronym, BIO, for that. And we know BIO is short for biography, and we all want a new bio. That's what I try to do with my book, give people a new bio. Balanced intentional optimism. I focused on that because optimism has been given a bad rap sometimes by those perhaps who maybe kind of go over the top with it into denialism, what I call denialism, where everything's just fine and it ignores problems, ignores challenges. I believe people need to understand there is balance to optimism, where you have to be realistic, you have to address problems. You don't want to be so pie in the sky that you're scary, to people, that you're not dealing with reality. And so we need to have a balance there. But the intentional part is not everybody's born as an optimist. I was not, as I say in the book. I mean, I was the type of person who could brighten up any room by leaving it. Right? And so intentional means, even though I may not ever be a natural optimist, I can be an intentional optimist. There are things that I can do that make me more optimistic. I am not relegated to pessimism because that was the way I was born or that's the way I was brought up. And so what I try to do with the book is give very clear, practical ways that we can become intentionally optimistic.
The conclusion in your book, and I'll read it back to you: balanced intentional optimism will take you deeper into all that life has to offer you. You'll find that God has many beautiful experiences awaiting you in a more fulfilling, significant life. Remember, this beautiful life of optimism that awaits you is intentional. You can opt for optimism. So from your perspective, to a wider global audience, what are the tips and tricks for opting for optimism?
Okay, one of the things is gratitude. It is developing a spirit of gratitude. And what I do, if you want to call it tip or trick, every day I write down, first thing in the morning, I write down 3 things I am thankful for. I start my day that way. In fact, I have this piece of paper I use. It says, thanking God for, and I write it on there. And I do that every day. I do 3, and I don't know if you can see that well, but anyway, I do 3 every day. And then I can look at this any day I want. And if I might have a tendency to feel down, I just look at this and say, I have no reason to feel down. Look at this. And it could be anything. I mean, I thank God for a person. I put their name on there. Or, hey, I had a good trip to so-and-so. or had a good meal at so-and-so. I thank God for my bed, my glasses, drinking water. I mean, every little thing. But I not only thank God for things, I thank God for people. Gratitude is being thankful for the people in your life. And so what I've done is I have listed some of the people in my life that I love and care for, and I've listed their positive attributes, their qualities, and I keep that. So I can look at that and say, look how blessed I am. Look at the people I have in my life, difference they make. And so gratitude is very important. So those are practical ways of building gratitude. Michael J. Fox said, gratitude makes optimism sustainable. And so gratitude. Another thing we talked about briefly, and that's be realistic. And that means when a problem comes up, address it. Don't ignore the problem. Don't say, oh, everything's okay, it's not there. That's denialism, and that will come back and bite us. We need to look at the problem and say, okay, this is a challenge. I'm going to get this thing fixed. And we look at it in that way, because to deny our struggles does not do away with them. It sends them into hiding so they can devise a surprise attack later. And I could tell stories of folks who I've ministered to who are just ignoring their problems, and later on, it came back to bite them. So be realistic. Monitor your mind is another very important thing to do. I like to say, think about what you think about. Challenge our own thoughts, because generally speaking, humanity tends to gravitate towards negativity. In other words, that's kind of our default. And so when I say monitor your mind, I need to think about the thoughts that come in and challenge them. Is that true? I need to say, is that thought I got just true? Just because it came into my mind, it doesn't mean it's true. Challenge it. Monitor your mind. And so part of that is putting the right stuff in your mind also. In other words, constantly immersing ourselves in optimism, because pessimism will get us if we don't. The world dumps the pessimism in automatically. That means I've got to be very intentional, there's that word, of putting in the right stuff. So when I'm driving, I'm listening to motivational stuff, I'm listening to the Bible, I'm learning Spanish, I am immersing myself in optimism. Zig Ziglar used to call this automobile university. In other words, University of Southern California, a number of years ago, did a study that showed if you drive at least 12,000 miles a year, and in that time, if you live in an urban area and drive at least 12,000 miles a year, in 3 years' time, you can learn the equivalent of 2 years of college education in your car. So think about, if I'm putting in positive stuff, all that time I'm dumping it in, that's going to have an effect on me. And so I'm constantly putting this in, but it also means the people around me. I've got to put myself with people who are positive. So I say, gather a positive posse around you so that affects you in a positive way. Building your self-image. Stop me if I'm going too long, but you got me going. Also, building a healthy self-image. This is extremely important, Victor, because a lot of us do not grow up with a healthy self-image. And you really cannot be an optimist if you don't view yourself in a healthy way. I'm not saying I'm the greatest in the world. I'm just saying a healthy self-image. I need to recognize my worth as a child of God, as a human being. I have value. I have great worth. When I recognize that value, I will be more optimistic. When failures come, if I recognize who I am and I'm worthy regardless of what I've done, I can allow failure to be my teacher rather than my tormentor. And I can be optimistic about that. So I use self-talk. This is something I learned from Zig Ziglar years ago, but I use a self-talk card. And I encourage people to do it. Every morning I stand in front of the mirror, and with enthusiasm, I look myself in the eye and I claim this thing. I, Gary Moyer, am an honest, intelligent, organized, responsible, committed, teachable person. With enthusiasm, I claim this, because these are the qualities we really all have, but we need to work on them. And so every time I claim this, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, it reminds me who I am. I'm claiming them by faith. I'm hearing my own voice say who I am. And that just starts my day off right. It helps me choose my attitude for the day, because attitude is a choice to a great degree.
That's brilliant, Gary. I was in Bendigo this week, which is a regional town in Australia, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, but I got there early. It was a morning meeting, and I went into both the toilets that served the conference room, and I wrote in Texter, "The leader looks like the person in your mirror." You so channel what we're doing. Look, my last question before I throw to the rest of the crew is, one of the great books of the 1950s was The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. And I reread it recently, and it is so modern. You know, it's got meditation in it. It's got taking time to think. It's like you surround yourself with positive people. Like you know, from his Christian base, you know, he talks about the scriptures. And the thing I like about your book is you quote Psalms and the like, and you connect up those commands from God to be optimistic. And it's a bit like Archbishop Tutu, who said, God commands us to laugh, you know, and laughing more makes you more optimistic. So before I throw to the others, do you just want to connect up that thinking of yours around Psalms and the other scriptures and that Christian notion that God commands us to be optimistic?
Yeah, in fact, if you read the Psalms are very interesting, because Psalms, to a great degree, are self-talk. You're talking to God, but it's also self-talk. And you see the Psalms, like, for instance, the psalmist starts off talking about what's going so difficult in his life. He's naming his emotions, but then he says, put your hope in God. Why are you so discouraged? Look to God. He speaks of God. He actually lifts himself up by looking to God. But think about, for instance, Philippians 4, verse 8. Beautiful passage. It says, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The Bible literally says we're to spend our time meditating on the good stuff, the positive stuff, the true, positive, good, empowering things. And it doesn't just say, think about it once in a while, or no, it says meditate on it. So this is why I talk about immersion, you know, constantly putting the good stuff in. The Bible is replete with this type of stuff. The Bible even says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And so the Bible is very, very practical when it comes to optimism.
I know Noreen, in fact, last night interviewed our federal treasurer. We're in the middle of a campaign, and she asked him about her optimism. But what I'd like to ask Noreen set up the Habits of an Optimist, which is our animated course, and she's a learned optimist. So Noreen, did you want to ask something about learned optimism?
Yes, thank you, Victor and Gary. That was most interesting. Yes, I mean, I also do believe that hope and optimism are very, very linked, and there is much debate about that, but I like the fact that you reinforced that for me as well, so thank you. I, as many would know here, I am, how would I say, I've never been a pessimist in my life, but I have mostly been optimistic for everyone else except for myself, which is kind of, you know, so because when I said to people, I had to learn optimism, they go, what? Yeah, well, I'm optimistic for everyone else, you know, but I wasn't part of my own cheer squad. So I really had to reflect on that and understand what that meant for me. And I was very resilient. I would keep going, but I actually wasn't necessarily optimistic for myself. So with Victor and our other colleague Jenny in Project Optimism, sort of really learned about little habits that make a huge difference. So the 14 habits that we have defined are simple things like smile, laugh, ask yourself what makes you optimistic, ask others what makes them optimistic. It lifts everyone, you know. Think like an optimist, use optimistic affirmations, like use those words, you know, those words you were talking about in the mirror. Surround yourself with optimists. Use language of optimism. So instead of saying, how are you? You know, Victor always calls it, you know, we all kind of call it a bit of a dead question. Say, well, yeah, what's a highlight for you today? Like, what's the best thing happened to you today? Just change it a little bit, you know, and then, you know, showing gratitude. forgiving, with optimism, and innovating and learning with optimism. So there's lots of little micro habits, a lot of which you have referred to, but we've actually put them into a course. And I've actually learned through the doing myself. And it works. It's really good.
Nice. That's beautiful. And I love that too, the question, what's a highlight for you today? I love that.
Just change it a little bit.
Yeah, it gets everybody looking at the positive. That's wonderful.
Yeah, but it's gentle, Gary. Like, I mean, Victor, I've been with Victor many times, as I'm sure a lot of people here have been, and Victor will go up and he'll go literally, what makes you optimistic, and like, he'll just explode and unlock the optimism in the person, whereas I'm a bit like, I gotta creep up a bit more, and I'll say, what's a highlight for you? Because I can do that. So I think we all have to find what language is the language that we can use, that we're comfortable with in asking that kind of a question, because it's different for us all,
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I found that helps me too is something, again, I learned from Zig Ziglar, which was when someone asks me how I am, I will give a more unique answer, such as outstanding, but I'm improving. And they almost always will laugh or say, wow, that's pretty good. That type of thing.
Love that.
Another thing I'll do that sounds strange, first thing in the morning many times. And again, this is not me naturally, but I taught myself to do it. When I go in the bathroom first thing in the morning, I get in front of the mirror and I'll say, hey, good to see you. It's going to be a great day today. I clap my hands. Now, that's not for everybody, but that helps me. It helps get me going. And, it is kind of over the top, but it's not to anybody else. It's just to me.
I love that
enthusiasm. I call, some people say fake it till you make it. I call faith it till you make it. It's where I'm going in the day. So I'm going to show excite.
Yeah, I know. And these conversations, I mean, Victor, all these kinds of conversations, when we've spoken about this before, are all great because it gives everyone who's listening permission to do it their way. Just so long as the outcome is you feel better, you feel more optimistic, and you feel brighter and lighter as you go about your day. So whatever floats your boat,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. And we've got Gertruda. There's colds going around Melbourne at the moment, Gary. So people are losing their voice. And our friend Gertruda Mache, who's a very inspiring leader, says, look, I'm coughing and not feeling well after COVID. But her question is, how do you remain optimistic when surrounded by negative people? And one of the things we experience is, for instance, people talking about at the exec table or the board table, that person who leans forward, waiting to say but, waiting to say however. And I had a CEO of a water company say, Victor, how do I implement this in my business? And I said, throw out the swear jar and replace it with the but jar. $10 into the jar when anyone says but at the executive table. But what's your advice to Gertrude? Because when you're surrounded by pessimistic people or you've got to spend time with pessimistic people, how do you cope in that environment?
Yeah, thankfully, I'm not in that environment a lot because I work with some very optimistic people, but I simply try to inject. I will try to either take what they say and turn it around or just inject something positive. And then I'll say something positive and like, that's right, isn't it? And then people will often nod their heads. When you give a true statement that's positive and you see people nod their heads, it can help turn things around. So I try to inject positivity by what I say without being offensive to them. See what I'm saying? In other words, I want to be understanding of what they're saying, but yet bring a positive turn to it. But I tell you, there are those times where you have to be with negative people, and I truly try to make those as few as possible. Because, I mean, I think we've all seen it's easier to pull someone down a staircase than pull them up. I mean, negative people can easily bring us down quicker than we can often bring them up, because just of the negative mindset of humanity. And so we need to inject that positivity as often as possible.
Going back to Norman Vincent Peale, of course, some of the American media blamed him for Trump because, of course, he was the pastor of the Trump family at the Marble Church in New York, in Wall Street. But one of his sermons that I read, he said, never argue with people, unless they're being negative. And if they're being negative, correct them.
Wow. Yep.
And I
Yes,
always
that's
joke that must have been the one that Trump was either goofing off, having a smoke in the toilets or sleeping through that sermon, because of course he became so argumentative and made argument his trademark. But in fact, the pastor, Norman Vincent Peale, is exactly channeling you, Gary. Don't argue with people unless they're being negative and unless they're being wrong. Look, Nathan, can I just pull you in here, if that's all right? Because I've just done the United Nations Staff College course on the circular economy, Gary, and it's one of the parts of the climate debate that is utterly optimistic, that we can change the materials we use, that we can change the way we use materials, we can make things that can be repaired. And too much of the climate debate is ground down in existential defeat rather than opportunity. And Nathan works in a company that's going to be zero carbon by 2024, is going into green hydrogen. So Nathan, do you want to, and of course you got me wearing these recycled spectacles, Nathan. Do you want to talk to us a little bit and ask Gary a question around that positivity and circular economy and climate?
Sure. I suppose there seems to be a very two-paced views on circular economy and those large environmental issues going forward. I'm just curious as to how that's moving forward over in the States. So I say we've got our program and our outlook and our optimism for circular economy at Yarra is fantastic. And the ideas that keep coming up, even yet another one came up last week, where I'm investigating now into using these we have floating wetlands. So we'll be able to repurpose old lagoons. We'll be able to extract sort of pollutants of concern and things like this. And then, of course, you have to look after these things and then take all the vegetation waste, but then we can take that to our waste to energy plant. So even the process within a process, there just seems to be more and more opportunity everywhere you look. And for me, that's actually what makes me optimistic, is that the opportunity that to be able to make the difference and to be able to, and it's just like, it doesn't matter how low you sort of feel, that it's just like, there are always these opportunities. Well, I can contribute to making this better by doing this. I can help this move along. So how's that looking over in the States? I haven't heard much coming over, but how are those movements coming along?
I don't have a lot of connection myself with that. I've not really kept up with it, but I'm encouraged that I see more and more emphasis on taking care of our world, more and more focus on, for instance, electric cars and recycling and so on. And especially I'm encouraged because I see a lot of that coming from our younger people, our young adults. And that encourages me about our young adults. They've got the right mindset. They say, look, we're not defeatists. It's not, well, that's just the way things are. We can change this. And that's very encouraging to me.
Awesome. It's good. There is definitely a lot coming in through the youth and the way that they're thinking about the problem. And yeah. And again, I think they're driven as well by a sense of being able to make that difference and being able to shape and create their own future. It's when you've got young people who think like that, I think it's extremely powerful when they feel like they've got control over their destiny and they're going to make it how they want it to be.
Yes.
I wonder if I can draw Mark Matthews in now, because one of the things that always inspires me about you, Mark, was that, identifying the opportunity to improve the lives of Fijians through better food and developing their own industry and growing food. And then, of course, you've worked in Cairns in far north Queensland, inspiring business people to think more globally. Do you want to talk a little bit about those experiences of, generating optimism for utterly new opportunities?
Thanks, Victor, and Gary. Thanks very much for your wonderful insights this morning. I'm driven by the hope and the possibility of of things that are positive and success, and the positivity of the possible. And much of the work that I've been in is in areas where people have actually not seen any opportunity. They've seen themselves in a situation where they don't see there's going to be any change. The systems around them aren't supportive of any change. And in fact, the communities are not supportive of them. And it's bringing all of the elements of the community together to be able to see the elements of potential change and envision what the future will actually look like. I think that's really important, to not just be very ethereal about it, but actually have the community create what the future is actually going to look like, and then bring that back to be able to draw the elements. Gary, I'm interested in your perspectives on the actions to success. While success itself is often defined by the actions that you take, optimism and hope can sometimes be quite ethereal, as I say. You've then got to transcend that aspect of success and optimism, hope and optimism into success. What are the sort of actions that you take and you propose that are those pivot points between the ideation, the perspectives, and the actions that provide that outcome?
Yeah, I like to say you've got to be before you can do, and you've got to do before you can have. And so when we have an optimistic attitude, when our self-image is strong, now we have the basis to make a difference. But to make that difference, we have got to have goals in place, and we've got to have accountability. And that's one of the things that I have found very helpful in my life. Was I learned goal setting. And one of the most powerful things I have found to turn ideas and philosophies into success is to have what I call a progress partner in my life. And that is, his name is Rick. I work with him, and we get together every 2 weeks and we talk about what our goals are, what we're working on. I know he's praying for me. I'm praying for him. He encourages me. I'll text him during the week. He'll text me or say, how's it going with that? And so on. And so that I am very adamant about the reason we don't get most things done, that we're not successful so many times, is that we are not disciplined enough to do what it takes to get through it. And many times what we need is someone to help us get to that point where we are. And so many of us do not want accountability. And at least, and I see it a lot, where people, they want to get something done, but they procrastinate and so on and so forth. But if I have someone who I can count on, another optimist who's close to me, who will ask me the tough questions, how are you doing with that? What do you need to do? Okay, what's stopping you? This type of thing. I think we get a lot more success when we do it together and hold each other accountable in a very positive way. In fact, that's one of the things what I call the silver bullet in my book and with any program. I mean, many of you may have been to, let's say, motivational programs or some seminar where you learn lots of good things, and then you leave feeling good and nothing changes. And the reason nothing changes is you have not been given an accountability process. You've just been given some nice thoughts. And so that's where a progress partner comes in to make those things happen. We hold each other accountable.
Definitely, we can't do it alone. And, Victor, your inspiration in creating the Centre of Optimism was that leadership and the drive, but you then brought in a whole crowd of people and keep on building that crowd and that community. And that's the thing that brings, I guess, the impact of the centre itself. Victor?
I think that the conversation that you two have brought in, this notion of, the accountability partner, and our advisory board member, John Hagel, who headed up the Deloitte Centre for the Edge, talks about one of the things we need to do in our next stage, now that we're coming out of COVID and we've built, is creating cells, of 10 to 15 people, you know, we've got our group working on grief, and we've got our group working on transformation and change. So we're developing those groups, but I think the two things interconnect. So I think I've got a big takeaway from Gary. You know, this accountability partners is really interesting. One of the things I'd like to throw, Helen, if you're comfortable, before we started the broadcast, Helen and Gary shared their experience of losing spouses and how that was transformative. And this week in Bendigo, you know, I had 60 people from the Chamber of Commerce. I asked them what makes them optimistic. It was just stunning. There was this woman who got up and talked about her husband having remained optimistic through his cancer treatment. And then even when he died, he transmitted his optimism. And then there was a fellow there who said his wife had died, and in her death, she had urged him to transform. And you know, he had become fit, he'd lost his procrastination, Gary. And then there was another woman got up and she said, look, I've changed what I'm going to tell you. On my mantelpiece, there's a picture of a friend of my best friend who died at the age of 18. And she had childhood cancer from early childhood. She lived to the age of 18, and she still inspires me today, and I'm now 50. So I just wonder, Helen and Gary, whether you could share some of those thoughts. Maybe Helen, start off just around that, you know, the partner dying and how that's continued to inspire you.
Thank you, Victor, and thanks everyone. Yes, my story has been my beautiful husband, Pete, died 21 years ago. And one of the turning points during his sickness, and I continued to try and carry on, or I did carry on, was we went to the, he had cancer, the Ian Gawler Centre in the Yarra Valley. And we had 10 days there in the September before Peter died in the following January. And that was such a transformative 10 days. It sort of turned many things on their head, and it gave us hope. And even though Peter did die, you know, not many months later, I was saying to Victor before, he had a good death. He came to peace with a lot of his demons. He made peace with a very sad relationship with his mother, which he'd had since he was a little boy. He made peace with her before he died, and we learnt lots. We learnt their affirmations, practices. We learnt about meditation. All those things, language, diet, and we were spiritual people before with faith, but we learnt to employ those things even more into our daily routines. And then I have carried those on to my children, and 3 of the 4 now have just finished meditation courses. They were young. They were 8, 10, 12 and 14. So they were very young when he died. But it gives me hope that the legacy of Peter's sickness and death, as much as we'd all love him to be here now with us, he is with us in a way, with us. It's carried on. And as Norman was saying, those daily practices and affirmations and routines, I start my day off with that, with my prayers and blessings and affirmations, then my yoga, and then I walk, and then I make my cup of tea and I enjoy that. And I just keep those things going. I've been doing them for 20 years. And I refuse to be sort of, as much as times I've felt so weighted down with it, and it's been really hard, but there's hope. And I got through it. I'm getting through it. I'm living, yeah, so it was that.
So Gary, would you like to share, your experience, the death of your spouse and how that changed your life?
She had cystic fibrosis, which I knew before I married her. And I knew she would not have a full life unless a miracle happened. But she was a very positive person, although she spent hours every day doing breathing treatments and so on. Such a positive person to live with, just strong will and love for people. I had grown up, I learned when I was a child not to cry. Big boys don't cry. I did it and was embarrassed, and somehow I learned big boys don't cry. So as I grew up in my adult life, when I would be frustrated or hurt, I would get angry, which of course didn't help anything. I knew I needed to learn to cry again. And when my wife was at our home, the family had been there and gone. People rally before they die sometimes. And I was there with her alone, and it looked like she was probably going to be dying soon. I remember calling the doctor nearby, and he came and did a house call. I remember him going into the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, and he came out and he looked at me and nodded his head. In other words, I'd asked him, is it time to call the family? And he nodded his head. And I remember him walking out the door closing behind him, and I walked into the center of the living room and fell down on my knees, and the dam broke. And I just cried like a baby for 15 minutes. My shirt was wet, the carpet was wet. And when I got up, I went into the bedroom where she was. She was partially sedated, and I touched her arm. She opened her eyes. I said, Laurie, I cried. And she said, she didn't have much breath left, but she said, tell me about it. Here she was, still being a blessing to me, ministering to me. And what I got out of that was I now had learned to cry because of what she went through, and she was so strong going through it. I had taught grief recovery early on, but now I experienced grief, and now I can cry with people very easily. I can minister to them very easily. And Laurie's life, and although I was heartbroken, when she just heartbroken, I still had hope within me, because I knew I would see her again. That's my belief, that I will see her again. I have no question about it. And so that optimism she had and her ministering to me helped me learn to minister to others. So I've gained a good thing from that, being able to cry with people, to be more of a compassionate person. And so that's a gain. And so I'm so blessed to have gone through that with her.
Can I pick up both of you? Because Helen talked about her husband forgiving people, with whom he'd had a difficult thing. And we've done a number of events with Dr. Fred Luskin, who is a professor at Harvard Medical School, and his expertise is forgiveness. And we connected up with him, forgiveness and optimism. And a whole chapter of your book, Gary, is devoted to forgiveness and optimism. So do you want to, again, talk a little bit? Helen's been very practical in, how it happened in her life. For you, what are the general lessons to us around forgiveness?
Yeah, there's no way we can truly be as fully optimistic as we should without forgiveness, because forgiveness hampers our optimism. When I am holding a grudge, I like to say it's kind of like holding an angry cat. The longer you hold on to it, the more pain you have. And forgiveness just does us in. I mean, the other person, whoever did it to me, they're going on with life, and yet I'm allowing it to ruin me. And so forgiveness is so important. But the challenge is many people just say, well, just forgive them, or forgive and forget. It's not that easy for many people. But if we'll realize what we're doing by holding a grudge is hurting us, that it helps us to be able to get rid of it. But how to get rid of it, something I quoted here was from Dr. Dick Tibbetts, his book, Forgive to Live. He says, to learn to forgive, we've got to learn to reframe what happened. In other words, we're likely not going to forget what someone did to us, but we can reframe it, look at it from a different angle to say, you know what? Wow, maybe the motivation that I have attached to that really was not the motivation. And I give, in other words, I'm giving the other person a break. I'm giving them slack. I'm saying, you know what? I choose to believe that, yes, what they did hurt me, but they probably really did not mean that. They really, and so, and something that really connects with me being a Christian and biblically in this is the example of Jesus. When the Gospels tell us when Jesus was on the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. That was a conscious choice he made. They knew what they were doing. They had crucified him. But what he chose to believe was they didn't understand the depth of what they were doing, the pain of what they were doing. And we can choose to do that with others. Because the reality is, I don't know what motivates you to do things. I can't know. Only you. And sometimes you don't even know what motivates you, right? The human mind is interesting. And so when we learn to say, you know what, I'm going to choose to apply a less than evil motivation for what happened there, it's amazing what that can do.
Stoicism, showing emotions. Mark, you've got an interesting perspective and question on that. And it's an interesting debate. I meet people who want to talk about Stoicism and optimism, and my son's doing BCE philosophy at the moment, so we're studying a lot of that. Mark, do you want to express that question?
Thanks, Victor. Gary, you were talking and touching on emotion, and I saw that you showing your emotion was that really that point of connection and empathy. As leaders, we're often expected to be stoic and resilient and not show our emotion, to be the flagstaff when everything else around us is falling apart. But in some respects, it's a very difficult thing to be able to hold that in. But I think more importantly is this, how do you see showing your emotion as a driver of your optimism?
You know, when we don't show our emotion, and this is a new learning for me, because I have been most of my life the stoic, learn to be the stoic, just, you know, keep it in. And I have learned that when I show my emotion and identify my emotion, it depowers it. That's not a real word, but anyway, when you recognize what it is, it doesn't have as much power anymore once you name it. But when you're not naming it, it's just kind of in there and kind of boiling and hurting us. And when it comes to leadership, you talk about optimism. Actually, the optimism that comes through that is amazing, because when we are transparent, the people who are following us greatly appreciate us. In fact, if we have time, I'll give you a brief example. Where I work, I've got, as you know, I'm also an administrator. I work within the denominational work, and I've had people tell me they respect me for what I do. Well, one day I was very transparent and very emotional. I felt God wanted me to do this. I shared a story of how I had been addicted to pornography years ago. And this was a very emotional story, and I've been free from it for years, thank God. But I just shared from my heart, and tears came to my eyes as I told the story. And I remember one or two people afterwards said, Gary, I've always respected you, but I respect you more now, you know, that you've told us that. And to hear that gave me optimism and them, because they know that this leader they're following is not some perfect person that they could never be like. They realize this is just a human being, just like them. And that makes people optimistic. They're optimistic because, you know what? Wow, I'm okay. I can aspire to better things because this person is not perfect.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, we've got a few people who are not on video. It's early in the morning here. They might still be in pajamas, etc. And we've got people from all around the world, different time zones. Natalia's got a really interesting question around forgiveness, Gary. And it's, how does one forgive what Perton and his regime are doing? How can they not know what they are doing? Would you like to answer that question, Gary?
Yes. And my answer, again, comes from the Christian and biblical perspective. And that is this. On one hand, of course, they know what they're doing on one level. they're killing people because they believe in a certain ideology. They know they're doing that. But when we say they don't know what they're doing, I don't believe they know the depth of the pain that they're causing. And the Bible teaches that really the only one who knows the human heart or mind is God. The only one who really knows our true motives. The Bible basically tells us that, and that's where I come from and what I've learned. We fool ourselves. Whether it's how we grow up or things we've told ourselves for the years, we tell ourselves lies. And so when we do things, we may think we know why we're doing it, but only on a certain level. A lot of this stuff is hidden. And so this helps me because I tell you, I'm not unlike a lot of people. In many ways, there's a part of me that says we need to go over there and find him and put him to death. I mean, do away with him. Maybe that would be right. I don't know. But I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, to think, I wonder what that person's background is. I wonder what they've gone through that I don't know about. I wonder if I might be doing what they're doing if I had gone through what they're going through. And so I in no way would justify what they're doing. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. But I can't judge their motive because I really don't know it.
And in peace talks and the like, one of the most difficult things for the negotiators is getting into the heads of the people they're negotiating with. Monique, you're working on improving food in aged care, and the Royal Commissions in Australia have shown that a lot of aged care facilities are not caring for people properly. And I think it picks up what Gary and Natalia have said. I don't think anyone would consciously feed someone in a way that didn't deliver them nutrition. So how are you and your team instilling that sense of optimism into the people caring for the aged?
Yeah, I also work for Meaningful Aging Australia, Victor, with a peak body for spiritual care for aged care. And so within both areas, like it's interesting today, I was just going to say at the end how much I needed today. I've had a week in Melbourne visiting some aged care homes. I've also been my work with the Lantern, where there has been a little bit of negativity this week, that it hasn't been so optimistic. And I think that it's very much coming from going back to what we said earlier about the media. I think we need to be showing more the positivity, because positivity, that butterfly effect that was spoken about earlier, is that we need to be sharing more of the good things that are happening, because most people that come into aged care, as you just rightfully said, they generally are coming because they've got a good heart. They want to make things better, but the environment that they're working in, the lack of resources, the finance situation in regards to funding, the expectations, all of those things just make it hard for them. So through projects like the Lantern Project, where we have a collaborative meeting, which is free for everyone to come and to hear and share what different people are doing and the different things that can be done to make it better for our older people, but easier for those that are providing the care and supporting those that are giving the care, is one way that we do it within Lantern. But Noreen, just how you said about vulnerability. We have a new CEO at Meaningful Aging Australia, and all of us this week at the homes had tears on including our new CEO. And just showing that vulnerability, I think, lets you stay in touch with those feelings and to keep it real, so that we keep optimistic as well. I could keep talking and talking, but
and I always
hope it all made sense.
And Monique, what you're doing is fantastic. So Gary, what's your reaction in that space where, the resources are difficult, in health systems and aged care? And in Australia, we've got an insurance system called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and it's costing more than anyone ever thought it would. So in that commercial space, or even NGO space, where you've got a budget and you've got to care for people and times are tough, what do you reckon around what Monique's just shared?
I'm kind of trying to figure out how to answer that regarding what she shared. you might want to ask that question again. I'm trying to clarify that.
Monique? Actually, I don't think Monique had a question. I think she was sharing that mixture of passion and stoicism and the emotion, just the emotion Monique's just shared with us.
And just even meeting with the residents, there was a gentleman that I met with this week at a home living with dementia who was a bit lost as to where he was, and he was frustrated, but just giving him some time. And it probably took a good 45 minutes for me to understand that he was lost, and guiding him back to where he needed to be. But our care staff don't have that 45 minutes to do it. So it has that knock-on effect. And then you can understand how aged care staff too can almost detach themselves because of the lack of time they have. But we need to ensure that whoever, I think from an optimistic view, anyone within aged care or the acute care sector that we come across, that we are positive and supportive of them and what they're going through, because we're not there every day. I've worked on the floor in an aged care home, and I'll tell you what, that the physicality and the things that you've got to do, not many people will quickly put up their hand to go and do it.
Yeah.
So I think we just have to, learn what we can, but support people where we can, and support our aged care and acute people with.
Yeah, it's a challenge. My mom is 87 now, and she's in an independent apartment near us here in Charlotte, North Carolina, United States. And I think something you touched on there, Monique, is just as much as we can to give them personal attention, even if it's not a lot of time, because so often the aged just feel left out, thrown away, and just us spending a few moments listening to them, asking them questions about their day, asking them what makes you optimistic. Love that question, Victor. Could make a huge difference. It really doesn't have to take a lot of time. Many times, I mean, we've all been in situations where you just say something encouraging to someone, and they just say, you know what, you just made my day. And I think it's the same with them also, because they're.
And I think our governments,
spot.
Sorry to jump in there, I think our governments too, they need to live a day in the life. They probably need to live a week in the life. And then that stoicness will go, hopefully fade a bit, and they'll actually have those emotions and that feeling of what it actually really is for those living in care and those providing the care.
Yeah. Rod Wade, you've joined us from San Diego. And one of the things, Gary, about Rod is he's been doing the procurement and distribution of COVID vaccines in a large part of your country. And his team, of course, have been working from home and then gradually coming back. So, Rod, do you want to share a little bit about how you have, expressed your infectious optimism and kept your team upbeat in the midst of COVID and, getting those valuable vaccines out to people?
Yeah, thank you, Victor. And Gary, thank you so much. It's a wonderful session, and I love the tie-ins between optimism and hope, the perspectives on how we go about our daily lives. Practicing, I always have appreciated Noreen and saying how you have to work at it, right? And so that's something we do. We work at it every day. And then what you said about leadership, Victor, has been helpful. Victor, we've got the Americas Conference scheduled back at Wild Horse Pass in Phoenix in November. 3 years to the week since I first met you. And Gary, if you can imagine 400 contract and commercial professionals in a room standing up and cheering and mobbing a speaker like he was a rock star, I've never seen anything like it before in my life. So that's how I met Victor. And it's that infectious optimism that comes along and really helps with what we're all trying to do. The other thing that resonated with me that you shared that I really appreciated was all of us doing something ourselves, small groups of people. And it really makes a difference. So that's what I try to do, to Victor's point, with my team every day. Victor, you're channeling something, because just today, one of my colleagues on my team, one of my top contract managers, announced to me that she's moving on to a new job after 10 years with our group. following on a few weeks ago, another one announced that in July she's retiring. But that's the environment we live in today, right? And so what I can do as a leader is help them make that transition, help our teams work through it, and let them know that I'm there for anything they need when they move on to these new roles or into retirement. What's important is the relationship, the work and the jobs we do, and we'll find others to come in and fill that. But I want to be part of a team that values each other as people and that supports each other as people. And I think that's seen us through the pandemic, to Victor's point, is creating an environment where what we do is so much less important than who we are and how we work together and how we support each other. So doing that, and then in the process of working with all of our pharmacies nationwide to make sure that we can get those vaccines out, support the members that we represent through health plans and state government and other municipalities and employers all over the country to make sure they have access to that. That's a pleasure to do because that's important work. But the way we do it is just as important as what we do. And I think that's the message that resonates with me. How we look at life, how we engage with each other. I share one other thing that Victor did for me a year and a half ago. There's this new thing called Clubhouse. It's an app that people come together and they speak. It's not video like this. It's just talking. And Noreen is on there too. And we did that. And I know Victor hasn't done as much on it, but I joined a group called the Appreciation Table, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Pacific, at 10 a.m. Eastern in the States. We talk about what makes you smile. What's making you smile today? So there are all these variations of optimism out in the world that we can take advantage of. And these groups are everywhere, Gary. So I love what you said about, as I mentioned before, little groups all over the place coming together. And through the power of social media and other media opportunities like this through Zoom, we can do this all over the world. And then you can have somebody like Victor said, like Zelensky making this, with the Zakara's show, having these comments about the faith in people. And it starts to give the rest of us confidence that there are so many more of us. So when media, Robert's not here, right, Victor? But Robert would tell us from a media perspective, media likes to play to the extremes, and that's what we do, right? News is one thing, drama, and drama is two things, conflict and tragedy. That's what you get in the news. So, but the reality is the majority of people in this world are just like the people on this call here. And our job is to continue to grow that network. So it's wonderful to be here. It's been a little while since I've been in the room with you, Victor and Noreen. I'm sorry it's taken a while, but I really appreciate it. And Gary, thank you so much for your perspective.
Oh, Gary is just, Gary's now a member of the centre, Rod. We've recruited well here. So listen, we've gone over the hour, so we've probably got to give everyone a bit of a rest. It's Friday night in America. It's Saturday morning here. But look, there's one final question. This morning I posted on LinkedIn. I'm in a bit of a debate. It's the last week of the election campaign here, Gary. And we created a document called The Need for a Positive National Narrative, an Optimistic National Narrative. And we gave it to all the political parties, and the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in their opening statements actually used lines similar to what we'd sent. In the first debate, they both, one opened with optimism, one closed with optimism, but the government is looking like it's going to lose. And all of a sudden, the advertising is really negative. It's not. It won't be easy under Albanese. Sounds like you've tapped the mat, doesn't it? Albanese being the opposition leader. And so this morning I posted on LinkedIn, I said, look, the pathway to victory is authenticity. And the Prime Minister is authentically optimistic. So if he's covering it up with negativity, he loses something. And so Mark Matthews' question that he's put in the chat is, defining our purpose gives us a vision, goals, and direction. So Gary, the last question for you would be, how does your optimism support creating a visionary, meaningful, and impactful purpose?
Optimism is, again, hope. And if you are seeking to create your purpose, optimism is essential. when I have optimism, I have hope that I can do this. And so that's my simplest answer. If you're trying to figure out, create a purpose statement of who you are, do everything you can to build your optimism, because that's going to help you. That makes you know we can do this. We're going to create this and it's going to be good.
Well, Gary, conversation has been wonderful. Your book is an inspiration to us. You've shared personal experiences, you've shared wisdom, the wisdom of authors. And what I love is everyone else in the room has shared their wisdom and their optimism. So it's a welcome to our community, Gary, and treat us as friends who will amplify your message. I love your town of Charlotte, so maybe we'll come and do a joint act in Charlotte, or what's that cool town north of you, Asheville or something like that?
Yes.
We can do that. Helen, I want to pick up what you talked about, and that is the Gawler Retreat Centre. Caroline Ward, who ran our Optimism of the Heart series during lockdown, is now the leader of what is the successor to the Gawler Retreat Centre. So I think we might, we were talking about doing a retreat. I think we will do a retreat at what was the Gawler Centre in Melbourne. Gary, you've given us so much homework. Can I treat all of the rest of you as my accountability partners on these matters? Gary Moyer, thank you from my heart. Thank you from our heart.
Thank you.
This has
Thank you,
been
Gary.
wonderful for me. I'm the one who wins here, believe me. Hanging out with you folks, I'm set. I'm good.
Well, we're going to turn this into a video and we're going to share it because there is so much inspiration in it. You know, everyone who hasn't bought the book is even better than mine, I might say, and well worth reading with those very practical hints. And really, as I said, you know, you think of Norman Vincent Peale, you know, The Power of Positive Thinking was a bestseller for 5 years in the 1950s. I think Gary takes that Norman Vincent Peale message from the 50s and brings it into a contemporary 2020s environment. So congratulations to you, Gary.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode of the Centre for Optimism series, conversations, talking about optimism and talking to leading authors on optimism. We'd love you to get involved in the Centre for Optimism. Gary Moyer is a member, Victor Perton, and each of the participants in the conversation were also members from all around the world. The website is on the screen, centreforoptimism.com, and there's a free subscription, or better still, take out a membership to support the centre. Have a great day.